You were never quiet. You were observant, but they called it shyness. You were never disconnected. You were discerning, but they called it avoidance. You were never broken, but the world treats you like something that needs fixing, because you don't chase noise, because you don't rush to speak, because you feel more in silence than others do in chaos. Carl Jung didn't call this Stillness. He called it orientation, a profound psychological compass that points inward, not because you fear the world, but because you're built to feel it deeply. Jung believed that introversion isn't a personality trait. It's a spiritual posture. It's the refusal to be consumed by the external. It's the instinct to protect the interior world, even when the outside demands your attention. It's not withdrawal. It's preservation. The introvert doesn't disappear because they can't handle the world. They step back because they're processing it on a level most people don't even register. The noise that others need to feel alive drowns them. The surface-level conversations that pass for connection drain them. The constant pressure to be visible, to perform, to please, to socialize on demand doesn't energize them. It erodes them. Because the introvert lives differently. They aren't motivated by validation. They aren't wired for the spotlight. They aren't interested in proving their worth by being louder than the room. And that's what terrifies the world. Because the introvert cannot be manipulated by surface rules. They see too much, feel too deeply. They recognize when something feels false, even if they don't call it out. They sit quietly in a crowd and feel the energy behind every word. They don't just hear you. They feel what you're not saying. And that is not weakness. It is intuitive strength. But that strength comes with a price. Most introverts grow up feeling like something is wrong with them because they don't light up in groups, because they feel heavy after small talk, because they'd rather have one raw conversation than 100 light ones, because they're accused of being too sensitive, too distant, too serious. But Jung saw something deeper. He believed that introverts aren't just quiet people. They are inward travelers. They walk paths no one else can see. They don't just think. They reflect. They don't just feel. They absorb. They don't just observe. They internalize. And that kind of depth can't thrive in constant stimulation. Jung saw introversion as a necessary balance to a world addicted to noise. He saw it as the anchor in a culture chasing momentum, because someone has to listen while others speak. Someone has to reflect while others react. Someone has to stay grounded while others burn themselves out. But the world doesn't reward that. It rewards extroversion. It rewards loudness, mistaken for confidence. Speed, mistaken for intelligence. Charm, mistaken for connection. So the introvert adapts. They wear masks. They force smiles. They show up when they're empty. They perform. And they pay for it in silence, in fatigue, in emotional burnout, in a constant low-grade guilt that says, "Why can't I be like everyone else?" But the guilt isn't yours. It's a signal that you're betraying your nature to survive the performance. And if you do it long enough, you lose track of who you are. You start to think you're antisocial. You start to believe you're broken. You start to shrink. But here's the truth Jung would want you to hear. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to be more fun. You don't need to come out of your shell. Your shell is your sanctuary, and your silence is not emptiness. It's integration. Because the introvert doesn't just withdraw, they regenerate. What looks like isolation is actually reassembly. What looks like stillness is actually restoration. Jung believed that introverts are often the most powerful people in the room, not because they take up space, but because they hold space. They don't dominate. They stabilize. They observe patterns others miss. They connect dots others skim past. And when they speak, it matters, because they've spent time with the thought before releasing it. That is power, not reactive, not performative, but intentional. And in a world that moves too fast for its own good, that kind of presence is rare. You weren't made to match the volume of the world. You were made to listen for what the world forgot to hear. That is the psychology of an introvert, not a flaw in the system, but a vital part of the human balance. And when you learn to stop apologizing for it, something incredible happens. You stop hiding. You stop forcing. You stop draining yourself, trying to fit into a pace that was never yours. And you return to your core, that quiet place within you where nothing is loud, but everything is real. Carl Jung didn't invent the concept of introversion, but he gave it a soul. In a time when psychology was obsessed with behavior, what people do, how they act, how they appear, Jung turned the focus inward, not just to what people show the world, but what they carry beneath it. He believed that introversion wasn't just a social preference. It was a core orientation of consciousness. While others defined personality based on action, Jung defined it based on direction. Extroverts move toward the world. Introverts move toward the self. It's not a choice. It's a psychic compass. And that compass determines how a person processes information, where they find energy, and what they fear losing. For an introvert, energy isn't gained through stimulation. It's preserved through space. External noise, especially emotional noise, can feel invasive, not because the introvert is weak, but because their inner world is already full. Thoughts, memories, images, emotions, reflections. The introvert doesn't process life at the surface. They absorb it completely. Every interaction leaves a residue. Every conversation echoes. Every glance, every word, every energetic shift gets recorded, sorted, and reflected on. This is what Jung called depth orientation. Introverts aren't just inward-facing. They're inward-feeling. And that kind of constant inner movement demands solitude to restore balance. But in modern life, solitude is mistaken for failure. Quiet is mistaken for disengagement. And introversion is mistaken for emotional underdevelopment. This is the distortion Jung warned about, that a world obsessed with doing would forget how to be. And in forgetting, it would shame the very people who embody stillness. He built his psychological typology system to restore this balance. Introversion and extroversion were not boxes. They were energetic rhythms, ways the psyche orients itself in relation to life. But it goes deeper. Jung paired these orientations with what he called the 4 psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. Each person, he said, has a dominant function, a lens through which they process the world. And each function can operate in either an introverted or extroverted way. This is where the truth of the introvert gets more complex. and more misunderstood. An introverted thinker isn't just quiet. They live in mental landscapes that are private, abstract, and self-reflective. An introverted feeler isn't just sensitive. They have a deep, often invisible value system that guides everything they do, without needing external validation. An introverted intuitive isn't just imaginative. They're tuned to symbolic meaning, future possibilities, and unconscious signals most people overlook. An introverted sensor isn't just grounded. They're quietly anchored in lived experience and rarely speak unless the moment truly matters. Each type of introvert holds a different kind of internal power. But they all share one thing. They process the world internally before responding to it externally. That pause, that silence, that withdrawal, it's not distance, it's decoding. But society doesn't wait for decoding. It rewards instant reaction. Fast answers, high output, loud presence. And so the introvert is often forced to pretend, to speak before they're ready, to say yes when they mean no, to show up when their energy is depleted, to perform emotional engagement when they're in a state of deep inner processing. And this performance isn't sustainable. Over time, it creates a split. On the surface, compliance. Underneath, exhaustion. You become someone others depend on, but someone you can't even recognize. You become the helpful one, the reliable one, the calm one. But inside, you're screaming for space. Jung understood this internal conflict. He believed that when someone lives too long outside their natural orientation, the unconscious begins to rebel. It shows up in dreams, in irritability, in fatigue, in loss of meaning, in symptoms that seem random, but are really cries for realignment. Because the psyche isn't neutral. It wants balance. It wants integrity. And if you betray your inner rhythm too long, your system begins to push back. Jung saw this as a psychological initiation, the moment when a person must choose between the image they've built and the truth they've buried. For the introvert, this often means reclaiming what they gave up to survive. The right to say no. The right to be alone. The right to process slowly. The right to not always be available. The right to speak only when something real wants to be said. And perhaps most importantly, the right to be whole without being loud. Because the world may not always understand introversion, but the psyche does. And it will not abandon you for being quiet. It will only ask that you stop abandoning yourself. When Jung described individuation, the process of becoming your full self, it was not about turning into someone new. It was about returning to the original rhythm, the original voice, the original knowing that got buried beneath layers of expectation and performance. For the introvert, individuation means learning to walk at your own pace, even if the world runs past you. To build inner safety so you no longer need to be understood in order to be real. To create boundaries that protect your energy, not because you're weak, but because your depth deserves protection. And once you begin to live that way, everything changes. You stop pretending. You stop explaining. You stop apologizing for how much you feel and how slowly you move. And you begin to live in alignment, not loud, not visible, but true. There's a cost to not being who you are. It doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't show up in ways people immediately recognize, but it builds slowly. In the way your body tightens when someone expects too much from you. In the way your chest gets heavy after social interactions that feel forced. In the way you smile during conversations while something inside you slips further away. This is the quiet burnout of the introvert, not from doing too much, but from being too much for too many people. You can only fake extroversion for so long before the mask begins to crack. And what leaks out is not just exhaustion, it's disconnection. You stop feeling joy in the places that used to comfort you. You start drifting away from your own center. You say yes, even when everything in you says no. You show up, but you're not there. You perform connection, but you feel empty after. Carl Jung warned about this. He believed that when a person lives in opposition to their natural type, the unconscious starts to rebel. Not violently, but consistently. It sends signals, subtle at first, difficulty concentrating, unexplained irritability, a persistent feeling that something is wrong even when everything looks fine. And if ignored long enough, these signals become symptoms. Numbness, anxiety, fatigue that sleep doesn't cure, a growing sense that you're living someone else's life. This is what happens when the introvert trades self-alignment for social approval. When you try to meet every expectation, answer every message, show up for every event, your inner system begins to collapse. Not all at once, not in a dramatic breakdown, but slowly, quietly, until one day you don't recognize yourself. You've become the version of you that others prefer, but you've lost the version that actually feels alive. This is the consequence of disowning your natural rhythm. Because introversion isn't just about energy. It's about identity. It shapes how you process emotion, how you experience intimacy, how you find meaning. And when that part of you gets buried, your life becomes hollow, even if it still looks full on the outside. You're in a relationship, but you feel alone. You're achieving goals, but they feel flat. You're surrounded by people, but none of them really see you. Because how can they? You've made yourself easy to be around, but hard to know. Not because you're hiding, but because the version of you they've accepted isn't the real one. And after a while, you start to believe that's all you are. A role, a presence, a body that listens but rarely speaks. A person who's always there, but never fully alive. Jung understood this fragmentation. He saw that when we betray our true orientation, we create an inner split. The outer self continues functioning. The inner self begins fading. And the longer the split remains, the more painful reintegration becomes. You start to forget what real connection feels like. You start to mistrust your own instincts. You start to believe your depth is a burden instead of a gift. That's the tragedy of repressed introversion. You begin to shrink, not because the world asks you to, but because you assume that shrinking is the only way to be accepted. And then you wonder why nothing feels real anymore. You wonder why your friendships feel shallow, why your work feels pointless, why your life feels performative. But the answer isn't outside you. It's inside. It's in the part of you that still remembers, the part that craves slowness, the part that wants less noise, not more. The part that feels more in 10 minutes of solitude than in hours of conversation. The part that doesn't want to escape the world, but but simply wants to come back to itself. Jung believed this part never dies. Even when you ignore it, even when you abandon it, even when you betray it to fit in, it waits, and eventually it asks you to return. But that return isn't easy, because now you're surrounded by relationships, commitments, identities that were built around the mask. If you stop performing, things will change. Some people will leave, some invitations will disappear, some connections will fade. But that isn't loss. That's clarity. You're not losing what you need. You're letting go of what you used to use to survive. And in its place, something new emerges. Stillness that heals instead of isolates. Boundaries that protect without guilt. Presence that doesn't require performance, but only if you're willing to stop living divided. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming one. And for the introvert, that means reclaiming your right to be quiet in a world that rewards the loud. Reclaiming your right to think deeply in a culture obsessed with instant reaction. Reclaiming your right to feel more than you can explain. Reclaiming your right to be whole without needing to be seen to prove it. You don't need to disappear. You need to return. Not to who others want you to be, but to who you were before you believed you were too much and not enough all at once. That version of you is still there, waiting. You don't need to be louder. You need to be clearer. You don't need more friends. You need more truth. You don't need to be seen by everyone. You need to stop hiding from yourself. This is the turning point for the introvert. Not when you learn how to fit in, but when you stop believing that you ever had to. Carl Jung believed that wholeness comes not from conformity, but from integration, from accepting and embodying the full truth of who you are, even if the world doesn't understand it. And the truth is, you are not lacking. You are not antisocial. You are not too quiet. You are not slow, boring, cold, or distant. You are simply tuned to a different frequency. While others seek stimulation, you seek resonance. While others seek recognition, you seek meaning. While others speak to connect, you feel before you speak. You are not behind. You are simply beneath. Beneath the noise, beneath the rush, beneath the surface where so many people spend their whole lives stuck. And that depth is your gift, but only if you stop apologizing for it. Because here's the truth. No one tells you. The world needs introverts now more than ever. It needs the ones who can hold stillness, the ones who can think beyond trends, the ones who don't need to perform to feel valuable, the ones who reflect before they react, the ones who listen not to respond, but to understand. We live in a time of overstimulation and emotional chaos, where everyone is talking, but no one is really saying anything. Where everyone is watching, but no one is really seeing. Where connection has become performance, and presence has become optional. And into that world, you bring a different kind of medicine. Your quiet is not absence. It is presence without ego. Your pause is not hesitation. It is respect for truth. Your solitude is not rejection. It is where your soul meets itself. You are not meant to keep up with the pace. You are meant to slow it down. You are not meant to match the volume. You are meant to ground the frequency. This is not weakness. This is strength that no one can fake. But only if you stop shrinking. Only if you stop betraying your rhythm to keep up with a race that was never yours to run. Only if you stop silencing your wisdom just because it speaks more softly than the rest. Because when you do that, when you stop trying to change your nature and start building your life around it, everything shifts. You stop forcing relationships that drain you. You stop showing up for things that don't nourish you. You stop abandoning your depth to meet the expectations of shallow systems, and you start creating something real. You create boundaries that don't require explanation. You create space that invites truth. You create relationships that don't feel like performance. You build a life that reflects you. Not the version of you that people accepted, but the version you buried just to be accepted at all. That version, the original one, is still there, and it's tired of waiting. Jung said that the greatest tragedy is not death, but the unlived life. And for the introvert, the unlived life is often the one where you were always present, but never really seen. That changes now. You are allowed to be slow. You are allowed to feel too much. You are allowed to leave the party early. You are allowed to need more space than others. You are allowed to be deeply affected by things no one else even notices. You are allowed to be different, not just allowed, designed. Because your difference isn't a limitation. It's a compass. And if you follow it long enough, it will lead you back to the life that was waiting for you all along. One that doesn't exhaust you. One that doesn't demand a version of you that doesn't exist. One where your silence isn't misunderstood. And your presence is finally enough. You are not broken. You are not missing anything. You are exactly what this world forgot how to value. But you don't need the world to remember. You just need to remember yourself. Comment below. I'm done apologizing for my quiet. And if this spoke to you, subscribe to Psychatic. This is where we stop performing and start becoming. Your quiet isn't a weakness. It's where your truth begins.